Welcome to Dolby Creator Talks. This is a show about how artists use technology to tell their stories, and I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Today, we're discussing the second and final season of Andor, the gritty espionage series set in the Star Wars universe from creator Tony Gilroy. As we've come to expect from Star Wars, the sound work is just remarkable, and you can enjoy it in all of its glory in Dolby Atmos right now on Disney+. In fact, the final episodes of the series were just released, so be sure to check them out before this conversation gives away some pretty big plot twists. Yes, that was your official spoiler alert. Now, as this series is the prequel to Rogue One, it's maybe the darkest of all the Star Wars franchises. I was really struck by just how unflinching and violent it gets. This is definitely not a show for kids, and that visceral impact is reflected in the show's sound design and mix. So joining us to discuss all this and more is Supervising Sound Editor, Sound Designer, and Re-Recording Mixer David Acord, as well as Supervising Sound Editor and Dialogue and ADR Supervisor Margit Pfeiffer. This conversation was a real treat for me because I have known David Acord since he was an apprentice sound editor working on Attack of the Clones at Skywalker Sound. And now, over 20 years later, he has worked on so many Star Wars films and series, including The Force Awakens, Rogue One, The Mandalorian, and many, many more. So I started the conversation by asking what it is for him that makes a show like Andor so special and what he was most excited about when working on season 2. Here's David.
What I loved about season one of the many things I loved about season one was it's a very small, tight-knit crew. A lot of times, maybe people don't know that on a lot of TV shows or features, the crews tend to, depending on the schedule and the budget, crews can be fairly large, maybe up to like 15 people or so, or more. On this crew, I think there was like a total of 5 of us for the entire show, editorial and mix. It's really small. It's a small crew. The time is expanded to accommodate that. And you get to become pretty close with everybody, and you get to, it's a more intimate experience, I think. That's one of the things I like about it.
Margit, you've done some work on some amazing feature films as well, Inglourious Bastards, Hunger Games, Justice League. How did you find your way into the Star Wars universe? How did this magical collaboration come to be?
The magic happened. I've worked with the Gilroys, so John, Dan, and Tony Gilroy for the past 10 years. And when Tony, we had discussed Andor many, many years ago, and I'm like, of course I want to be part of this. How could you not? And what a wild ride and great adventure it's been. So yeah, grateful.
Tell me a little bit about how you guys work together. I mean, I'm presuming, David, that you kind of handle sound effects and sound design, and Margit, are you're handling dialogue and those production kind of track issues?
Correct. I do dialogue, ADR, loop group. So it's pretty much 2 different types of food groups. And Dave also obviously does the re-recording mixing as well on top of the sound design. And it was great fun to, have a small team like that because you really develop a shorthand, and especially over, years of working together.
And David, you're on the mix, you're mixing sound. Who's mixing dialogue and music?
Me.
Oh, you're doing the whole thing by yourself?
Everything.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not unusual for episodics to have a single mixer do everything. So yeah, that was the process. It's just me handling all of it. I have a super session with everything in one session: music, dialogue, effects, Foley, backgrounds, ADR, all that is all in one giant, Pro Tools session to kind of, crawl through, every week.
Yeah. And then another fun part of this particular show is you end up doing a lot of the work in London, right? Because that's where the production is happening. And so,
yeah.
David, are you doing some sound design and preliminary work up at the ranch, at Skywalker Ranch, and then you go to London? Or kind of walk us through the workflow? How does that work?
So the bulk of the work is done stateside. So I do, for my end, we do all the sound effects and Foley work at Skywalker, and I do a pre-mix pass of the episode, including dialogue at Skywalker. Margit works in Los Angeles working on dialogue. We have a dialogue editor at Skywalker as well. But anyway, so the bulk of that's done in California. We do what we call the final mix pass at Delane Lee in London, in Soho. And that is usually about a week per episode ish. We spend probably 2/3 of that time with John Gilroy, who is the main picture editor and co-producer of the show. So we get the actual music on day one, and we spend a lot of the first day and a half is working in the actual music against everything else that I've pre-mixed. And then we just sort of go over the episode over and over again with John, and we get into a place where we feel like, okay, we can show this to Tony, move on to the next episode. We stack up 3 episodes like that for Tony, and then Tony comes in that third week, and it's just all about showing the episodes to Tony and Sana, our producer, and mix fixes and screening that whole week. And then you go back and you start it over again with the next 3 episodes.
At Delane Lee, are you on a theatrical stage, or are you in a smaller room for like a 7.1.4 room? What's your situation there?
It's a smaller room. It's like a larger near field stage. This room is kind of a small near field stage. I'd say it's maybe twice the size of a room like this. Delane Lee has, I think, 4 of those rooms. Then they have a couple of bigger rooms, and they have like a giant stage. When we did the theatrical premiere version of the first episode, we went to the giant stage and did sort of an up mix from our near field to like a full Atmos, theatrical awesomeness on that stage.
I had noticed from your, the social media feeds from some of the Skywalker folks that you guys had a big theatrical premiere in LA. And so I'm kind of curious, like, how did your near field, home theater Atmos mix translate? I mean, was it pretty close, or what did you have to, what kind of adjustments were you making to get you through the one theatrical screening?
Well, I only heard it when we did it at Delane Lee. I didn't go to the premiere. Margit could probably answer that better than I could.
I mean, it sounded wonderful, and it really translated well. But we've also taken, Dave, when we were on the big mix stage, you obviously made sure we did a wonderful up mix. And we also had the pleasure in London for season 2 for our little first 3 episodes strung together to invite the cast members and have our own little screening there in this beautiful, brand new, wonderful soundstage, mix stage at Delane Lee at the new facility. And it was a great memory too on top of the premiere.
Yeah, we had Miro and Cyril and who else? Oh, Perrin were all there. For a little screening. That was really fun.
David, you mentioned the music, and you said something interesting. You said on the first day of the final mix, you have the actual music. So I was kind of curious about your, working with the new score from Brandon Roberts. Yeah. I think if there's a truism about the Star Wars sort of cinematic language that was established with the first set of films, is like I would describe them as music forward. I think one of our jokes was like, if a Star Wars movie is 120 minutes, it's got 118 minutes of music.
Lately.
So are you having some, like you said, actual music on the first day of the mix, but are you having some rough versions that you can kind of see hear what's happening, then kind of guide you through sort of your sound design process before that?
We work against demos, so we get a demo from the composers group that's just a stereo comp of whatever they've made. The instruments are usually synth that's meant to sort of represent what they're going to record, and it's usually pretty close. At least you get the feel of what they're doing, and the beats are hitting in the right spot, and that sort of thing. But our music editor, John Finkley, shows up day one. You know John?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Okay. With the music, and it's much more dynamic, and you've got all these 5/1 stems nicely laid out, and you can really kind of dive into things and push that perk a little more, or pull back on that brass, and whatever you need to do in the moment.
Now that we've got all that logistics, technical stuff out of the way, I want to dive into the art a little bit on Andor. So, I mean, obviously it's the sequel to Rogue One, and it's dark. I think, this is one of the darkest kind of, iterations of the Star Wars universe that we
For sure.
This is as opposed to some of the other Star Wars pieces and series. This is not for kids. No. So does that affect your approach to that tone? That must affect your approach to sound design?
Yes, especially when it comes to violence on screen. The violence we have to amp it up in a way that is realistic. That like we want those lasers to sound like real guns. What a real as 21st century Earthlings, what a gun sounds like is a particular way we know either through real life or through cinema what a gun sounds like. And in science fiction, you don't always get that sort of visceral sound of guns, particularly in some of the older versions of Star Wars. In Andor, we want to make sure that the audience feels the threat and the danger of these weapons. The impact of those weapons has to be violent. A laser whiz by has to, strike fear, that sort of thing. One of the most violent things in the series is the fist fight in the bar in episode 8 between our two of our main characters, is a just gritty, just brawl. It's a brutal brawl, and I think that I want to tip my hat to Josh Gold, who actually cut that fight for us and did a phenomenal job of just making what I think like a bar fight like that might actually look and sound like is brutal. And anyway, to answer your question, yeah, that's sort of weird.
I think you're selling that a little bit short by calling it a bar fight. I mean, that kind of brings to mind like a couple of drunk guys just throwing a couple of punches. Like I have never seen a fight like that in Star Wars before. It's really like somebody's not gonna walk away from that fight at the
right.
end of it. The stakes are really high between Cyril and Cassian, and I didn't know Cyril could fight like that. That was kind of an amazing surprise. But that. Just the brutality of that fight was really kind of breathtaking. And so I'm kind of curious, like how, I'm always curious about like, how do you find that impact without going too far? Did that take some time and experimentation in the mix? And
it's funny when we put it together, when Josh and I cut it and then we put it together and mixed it and presented it to Tony, my initial thought was, we've gone too far. Like but Tony loved it. He was like, this is great. This is exactly what we wanted. It's these two guys this is a fight to the death.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it. So yeah, I'm kind of happy with the way that turned out.
It's a pretty amazing scene.
Yeah.
Margit, did you have to? There's some fun ADR sessions that came about through that, or was that actually leads me into a question for you, which is like, how are the production tracks? I think notoriously Star Wars is not a very production sound friendly, environment.
Yeah, I have to say we were really lucky. We got to pick and choose our production sound mixers, and they did a wonderful job. So Nadine Richardson and Danny Hambrook. And they did 6 episodes each on season 2. And so the tracks we got were wonderfully laid out, everything you could wish for. And then you have the obvious things, you don't want the plane buys and then the traffic noise. I mean, there are things you can't control and you have to deal with. But in terms of that fight scene in the bar, we did try to embellish it. And I had all the actors do their death grunts and fight efforts, and they were all into it. I mean, Cyril and Cassian loved it. And we used what we could, from production, what was really punchy and wonderful. And then we grabbed the rest from ADR, and Dave's sound design made it hurt.
Definitely did. I mean, along those lines, talking about the darkness, the droids are much less cute than in other parts of the Star Wars. I mean, they're cute, but they're also menacing and neurotic, in the case of B2 EMO. And there's just so much emotion coming through the droid dialogue. But Margit and David also, I feel like there's less vocal processing with these droids than I'm used to hearing. Is that the case? Or like, tell me a little bit about the sound design and the handling of the vocals for the droids.
So for the droid, when in this case we kept the voice of our puppeteer, because in season 1, because he had such a wonderful, intonation, and B2 was always conceived, in Tony's own words, to be the family dog, and it was just such a wonderful performance. So we kept it, and there's a slight treatment on it, of course. But you don't want to go over the top in this moment, because you don't want to lose the emotion.
I understand that the intention was always to find a vocal actor to revoice to revoice B2 and in post, but then you guys just sort of fell in love with the puppeteer's voice, and he's actually doing all of those like stutters and stops, and that's part of his original vocal performance, which is amazing.
Yeah, he's doing a great job. So we kept him the whole time throughout, and was perfect.
What were your conversations with Tony Gilroy, even back in season 1, about the creative inspirations for the show? I feel like sometimes I'm watching like classic spy thrillers, set in the Star Wars universe. But were there any like references?
Yeah, I don't remember specific other projects you'd be referencing, but yes, it was very, very much meant to be sort of World War II spy thriller. That was sort of the vibe from the get-go in season 1. That's what we wanted to do, was echo that sort of feel, that kind of boots on the ground. We're getting into the sort of the microverse of a rebellion and what that looks like. Getting away from the big broad stuff of Jedi versus Sith and giant space battles and all these things. It's the stuff that happens on the ground, that all those little moments on the ground that trigger those bigger moments, like space battles and all that sort of thing. You need those little moments. You need the sort of unsung heroes to sort of be the catalyst for the larger events. And I think that's really the theme of the show.
I feel like there's a lot of attention paid to the tech of the universe in Andor, and making sure that it's appropriate within the timeline of where these stories sit in the Star Wars universe. Like, you feel like this definitely feels like it's just before, Rogue One and then episode 4. And I feel like visually there's a lot of seed planting for, episode 4. So is there a similar approach to the sound design? Like, are you thinking about what would have fit comfortably, like in those first few films?
There's a concentrated effort to sort of keep it in the world of New Hope era sound design, New Hope, Empire, Jedi, that original movie sound design. But we also, because of the tone of the show, we want to keep it that sort of a gritty, grounded, hyper-realistic feel as well. So straying away from the sort of fantasy side of those movies and getting into the more, diegetic side of the sound for the show. So if we were recycling a sound like a Stormtrooper blaster from New Hope, 1977, if we're going to use that element for a stormtrooper shooting a gun like we did in Andor, we also want to punctuate it with something. We want to give it a little extra feel to it, again, to keep that sort of grounded violence that we're looking for the show. So there's a mix of old and new for the legacy sounds. And of course, there's plenty of new sounds to have fun with as well.
I feel like along those lines, we're experiencing a much grittier version of Coruscant than we did, in the prequels for sure. You've got that great sort of that halfway house apartment that they hang out in. And from the prequels, I always thought that everything on Coruscant everything was brand new and sparkly and very, very slick sounding. But this is a very different feel for Coruscant. So tell me a little bit about the sound design for some of those seedier parts of the capital world. Yeah,
like you pointed out, what we've seen of Coruscant, particularly in the prequel movies, is this very shiny, beautiful city planet. For those who don't know, Coruscant is a planet where the entire surface is a city. There's no surface that is like left untouched. So it's a totally urban planet, and all we really ever see, for the most part in the movies anyway, are the prettier sides. There's moments where we see some seedy things, like in episode 3 and in the Clone Wars. But Andor, when we're in Coruscant, pretty much dwells there in that sort of underbelly part of Coruscant, tenement housing and just some seedier parts of like real urban living that not everything is shiny and pretty. Not every building has a doorman. It's this is probably how the bulk of the people on Coruscant live is like this. So when we're in the apartment with them, the traffic buys, we gave some of the vehicles a little extra throat to them. You hear the occasional Coruscant police siren go by. That's always sort of a giveaway in movies where you're not in a good place when you hear police sirens in the background. Cassian's walking down the hallway. You hear one room is blasting music. There's a crying baby over here. There's a couple arguing over here. It's sort of like it's not, he's not living in the Four Seasons. This is so that's sort of the things that we were looking at, for, the part of town that they're living in Coruscant. Yeah.
I love the analog feel of the sound in the show. And one of my favorite aspects of the sound design is radio. It's a recurring element in the show, and it's a huge part of the storytelling. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about designing the sound of the radio communications. Episode 5 even opens with that great moment of Clea tuning the radio, and I'm in love with the massive comm station that she has in the back of the antiquities shop.
The radio communication setup that they have, which is a sort of covert. In the show, it's referred to as the Fractal Radio, is a design that's, there's a lot of John Gilroy in that design, as far as like the concept of it and the feel of it. It's a recurring thing, not just Clea's radio, but if we're with Cassian, his radio has a similar vibe, just so you can kind of connect the two, that they're on the same bandwidth. That kind of goes back, I guess, to maybe Tony's original directive about the show being a bit of a World War II spy drama. That there's a lot of that kind of thing in those old movies. There's a lot of
listening and dialing.
Yeah, somebody, in a basement somewhere, Morse coding to somebody. That's sort of the vibe that we're going for. And a lot of speaking in code and that sort of thing, planting listening devices, as we saw in, I guess that was episode 5. That's sort of the vibe of the show. And of course, because of Star Wars, the radio has to be a little extra, and it's got maybe a little more bells and whistles than you might expect just a simple radio to have.
And if you listen closely, you can hear Tony Gilroy in the Fractal Radio as well.
That's true.
Is that true? Margit, I wanted to ask you about that because I feel like, there's such emphasis on the radio voice. There must have been a massive loop group on this show, or at least a lot of work, right?
We had a wonderful loop group, the Skywalker loop troupe, and we recorded a lot of things. We recorded in fictional languages. We did the Fractal Radio, like anything like voice performance wise that you could bring any extra special sonic texture to. And it was great fun. I mean, it was really tremendous. I had them sing in a fictional language and chant, and we went all out. And it's all about capturing the energy that will embellish what was recorded on set, and then go much deeper. And to lead into the Gorman language, Tony Gilroy very early on during season 2 had been talking about it, how important that was to him, and designing this fictional language based on French phonetics for the planet of Gorman. And so the actors learned to act in Gorman. French actors can read it off the sheet, even though everything is made up, the grammar, the structure, the words. And Marina Tyndall did a great job. She was the dialect coach for Diego Luna on Rogue One already, and then season 1 of Andor. And she created this wonderful, wonderful sounding language. And we used it all the way throughout for protests, the town hall, the chants, the singing, the panic cries. I mean, everything throughout the battle, everything on Gorman.
At first, I was like, "Wait a second, is that because I don't speak French?" But I was like, "They're speaking English with French accents. Is it just French?" But that's fascinating. So it was sort of, yeah, it seemed to my ear to sound like it had some elements of French, but it's completely made up. But it's interesting. So they were French actors doing it. That's a really specific choice. That's fascinating.
There was a choice made for Gorman. So there was, it was always Tony's idea was to lean it heavily on the French, and like sonically, obviously we ran with it and it was wonderful. Also in the production design, and the French beautiful cafe, that epic final fight between Cyril and Cassian also takes place. And so we embraced it, and the sound of it, the melody, the tonality of it all works beautifully.
I'm glad you brought that up because it segues into, I want to spend some time talking about episode 8, because it really is kind of a show-stopping centerpiece for season 2. And, it climaxes in this huge set piece of the rebellion and the massacre that happens in the town square on Gorman. I mean, you talked a little bit about the alien language. I'm always fascinated by the development of the alien languages in the Star Wars universe. So was that something that was, I mean, obviously that had to be figured out before production, right? So and then the actors got trained in it. That's fascinating.
So it was figured out long before production, and there was obviously every single line was thought out and translated for the cast as well as for the loop group. And Tony gave pages and pages of stage notes and what and how and where he wanted it placed and what the intent was, the energy should feel like. And then the actors had fun on set. I mean, they were all the way to the point so fluent in it that they could improvise amongst each other, even though, of course, most lines were written and specifically tailored to the text. And it worked beautifully.
A lot of actors there for that sequence. That's kind of you kind of have a built-in loop group already to go. So did you end up using, I'm thinking about right before the massacre, they start singing, and it's these huge moments. Was that all captured during production? Did you have to augment that in post, or tell me a little bit about that?
Some of it. So like our lead that starts off the song, of course, he's a cast member and he started it perfectly. But then you have all these shots you want on the wide shots. You want to feel the crowd singing along. And on the close-ups where people are moving their lips in the background, but you have nothing on it, you want to fill it out. You want to be able, on a scene that runs so long through, it feels like the entire episode, you want to keep it interesting. So you want to have different variations. You want to feature sometimes the production more, sometimes the extra stuff you recorded. So you have a little bit of a dynamic between the different cuts and the different locations on the plaza, on Palmo Plaza where you're at. And it's a texture, it's a sonic texture you want to weave in and out around the sound design and the music, and then the big crescendo at the end and the chanting, and it all works to be one giant build.
And tell me a little bit about the production. Was that a practical location, or was that a backlot, or how much control did they have, from a sound perspective over that sequence?
For Andor season 1 and season 2, they went really big on all the sets. They shot at Pinewood, a lot of scenes at Pinewood. So they had wonderful, beautiful sets built there last season for Ferrix, and this year the Palmo Plaza and the beautiful cafe, and everything was established. And so they had pretty great control over it.
Sets on a soundstage.
Yes, on the studio backlot of Pinewood, yeah.
Obviously, the rebellion and the massacre on Gorman it's a huge set piece sequence, but in a way, I feel like it's really Cyril's story. He's one of the characters that changes the most through this experience in this episode, and we follow him through it. But there's that wonderful moment, when he's watching this massacre and it starts to play out in slow motion. And that gave you a really interesting opportunity to do some creative sound design.
that evolved quite a bit with how to handle that moment, where it's largely a music sort of thing that's happening there, but we're getting into Cyril's head. As you've pointed out, his character is sort of, we think anyway, that he's sort of moving away from his purpose there. He's becoming a little more aware of what's happening in a human way. So he gets in his headspace, and he's looking around, and we have all these kind of like slow motion-y laser buys and muted explosions, and then it sort of snaps back into it, at the end of it. That evolved quite a bit. It's it's more stripped down than it used to be, which I think is good. I think it needed to be that way. On that show, we like to keep things, when we can, quiet. That can kind of sell emotion a lot more. If you have like your bursts of violence are what they are, and then kind of pull back and give everybody a moment to sort of think about it. But yeah, I do like that this is Cyril's, this episode in particular is Cyril's kind of turning point. And it makes you wonder right at the end of his fight scene. I don't want to give anything away if people haven't watched it. There's that one moment right before that final event happens where you see a look on his face and you think like, okay, maybe he'll be a good guy. Yeah. He'll turn. And then, well,
what happens.
What happens. Yeah. You can't say he didn't have it coming, I guess. I don't know.
Oh, goodness. That's great. Well, as Margit mentioned, that is a long sequence, the whole, the build up, the protest, and then the massacre. And so, Dave, from your perspective, I'm kind of curious, since you're the solo mixer doing dialogue and music and sound effects, like when you're confronted with a sequence that's that big and that long, how do you kind of like, do the dance and establish the dynamic range and just make sure that it's not going to become fatiguing for the audience?
That's 100% the challenge in an episode like that, where it is almost wall to wall. It's a slow build. It's a slow, gradual build, and then of course it gets a bit of a spike there. It's the only episode I think we've worked on that is like that, where it is just the whole episode is just one gradual build up until the massacre. That it's definitely a challenge, especially when you get into the moments with all of the crowds, and not only just the crowd singing, but just the crowd sounds, the crowds chanting or the crowd singing or the voices, and cutting between the different areas and trying to make those, those cuts feel like different spaces. And all the while, you've got music trying to tell the story as well. Yes, that balance is extremely challenging, and it's just sort of about a give and take, and having it, have the two elements sort of flow and intertwine as best as possible, and not compete against each other. That's the real challenge, is to kind of have those handoff moments where each one can kind of live and tell the story, and then come away and let the other stem tell the story, and then kind of trade off.
I would imagine with a sequence like that, it probably goes through an evolution, and you get Tony in and play some stuff for him, and then you might have to open some stuff up, I'm sure.
Yeah, I have my pre-mix pass, and this is my pass, what I think it sounds like. Then I play for John Gilroy, and then John has his vision, and we collaborate we land on a spot where we think that this sounds right for us as a duo. And then once we get Tony and Sana in the room, then they'll have their own sort of take on what we've done, which, to John's credit, he's got a pretty good sense of what Tony wants. So we don't usually stray too far. Once Tony gets in the room, Tony's notes tend to be a little broader, a little more broad strokes things about, what's leading the charge, what's telling the story here, effects or music or dialogue. Tony leans a little more that way, and John gets a little more into the minutia of it.
From a sound perspective, one of my favorite moments in season 2 comes right at the very beginning. Cassian stealing the prototype TIE fighter. And I just love this sequence because it has a lot of humor. Obviously it goes very wrong before it goes right. And it's just surprising that, when things can go so terribly, horribly wrong.
Yeah, that was one of the, unsurprisingly, it's the first episode. It was one of the first things that I designed for them. It was, they wanted the TIE, it's called the Avenger, the TIE Avenger. They wanted the Avenger to sound, at least in the beginning where he's trying to figure it out, think of it like a bucking bronco, like this is a beast he's trying to tame. And so we played with the idea that the original TIE fighter sound it's an elephant, is the elephant scream, is the root of that sound. So I played around with that concept with the Avenger, and it's just kind of wailing and making these horrific sounds as it's bouncing up and down, spinning and going backwards, and not wanting to be flown by this amateur. I think that's
or stolen, right?
Or stolen, yeah. More to the point. And yet its weapons are just like insane and violent and powerful. So it's this kind of big, wild, deadly thing that he's trying to capture, and that's what we were trying to do. And then of course you have to sort of, as you pointed out, there's some comedy in all of this too, so you can't let that go. Like when he's trying to fire the button and the trigger won't the trigger's just kind of clicking and he won't go. Finding the right sound for that, we just finding the moments where you can kind of have a little bit of levity in between moments of wild violence.
Obviously, you've got a huge library of 50 years of Star Wars stuff. I mean, is that the first place you go, or do you kind of have a sort of like do you also have this tendency of like, no, I want to create something new for this moment?
I think your gut is to want to make something new every time, but you have to temper that with like, this is ultimately part of a larger story, a franchise, whatever you want to say. That there are legacy sounds that you don't want to ignore. So yeah, there are moments of, even with using the TIE Avenger as an example, where we are using some classic TIE sounds in there, just if for no other reason to sort of remind the audience, that, we're all on the same page here. This is still a TIE fighter. So we want to sort of work in some classic TIE sounds with it, here and there, so that you kind of know that this thing, was born of the other TIE fighters that we've seen in the movies.
Well, you're on the Dolby podcast, so of course I have to ask you about how you use Dolby Atmos, in the show. Maybe, just a little bit about your philosophical approach to mixing in Atmos, especially for a streaming series at home. Mm-hmm. And maybe, for some of the folks at home who have Dolby Atmos systems, mm-hmm. like what are some moments that, when they have their friends over, they can show off a little bit. They're like, listen to this.
For Disney streaming, we don't typically use objects. We use the beds. It's sort of a 712 style, Atmos mix. But for me, one of the beauties of Atmos, is of course full range surrounds. And, that's, I think, most mixers, I think, would agree that is sort of the best part of it all, is having that flexibility, treating every speaker in sort of, equal measure. I think that just to kind of, not to belabor it, but the episode 8 is probably the best version of that. Having weapons fire and voices calling out and screaming, even just the singing and the crowds happening all around you, is that sort of enveloping vibe of that to bring you in as an audience into that moment, and share that experience. I think that's where Atmos really kind of shows up for us in a really great way. I just want to tip my hat a little bit to Matt Wood for, you mentioned Loop Group earlier. He was one of the guys leading the charge with Margit on that Loop Group, and of course participant as well.
I was about to say, Matt, he can't not perform as well.
He can't not. Exactly. Yeah. We love Matt.
We love Matt. Yeah. Very grateful.
Absolutely. Well, final question. Sometimes I like to wrap up by just asking you guys, like, maybe call out one of your favorite sound moments from the series, just something that, when you're in a playback or something, just kind of fills you with a little warm feeling every time it rolls through. Just to put you on the spot, but yeah, what's a favorite sound moment from season 2?
Margit mentioned this yesterday, but I'd almost forgotten about it, but it's the K2SO Frankenstein moment at the end of episode 9, rising up from the dead, basically, with the flip of the switch, Frankenstein's monster moment. And then you get to hear Alan Tudyk's voice for the first time in the show. That to me is really fun, and it's a nice little button on the end of episode 9.
I also love the final speech of Mon Mothma in the Senate. And once the crowd goes crazy and you feel the volume in the room, the amount of people, the energy shift and the chaos, starting to unfold. But it's one of these moments that starts off so beautifully quiet. You lean in to hear it, to feel it, to think about it. And then you take it from there. You can really ramp it up. And to me, I always get goosebumps watching that scene.
I would love for you guys to talk a little bit about. I hadn't even thought to ask you about that, but that is such a signature acoustic environment, and I presume you're during production you're close miking and getting it pretty dry, but then you have to put it into that specific space. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so thank you to Cinematic Rooms for. For a lovely reverb plugin for that. I utilize another plugin for multiplying crowds, and I'm blanking on the name of it, but it was a really cool kind of lo-fi plugin that was pretty useful for multiplying. You could take like 12 people and make it into 100. That was a pretty fun scene to do, and the cutting back and forth, and when you're cutting away and hearing parts of her speech through monitors in the hallways, and then depending on where you were in the space and in the Senate, whether you were hearing it off screen or you're hearing it on a monitor, and different kinds or multiple monitors, and cutting back, hearing the speech sort of move around like that acoustically was a pretty fun thing to do as well.
Margit, David, it's been a great pleasure to have you guys on the show talking about Andor. I really enjoyed this season, and of course, a little sad that we won't. I think the story's wrapped up. I think we know where it's going. Probably I'm speculating we're not going to get a season 3 of Andor.
I think we all have to watch Rogue One again and enjoy that over and over. It made me want to go. That's on the to-do list for this weekend. It made me want to go back and watch Rogue One again. So yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys again for coming on. It's always a pleasure to talk with you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn.
Many thanks to David and Margit for joining us on the podcast today. And an extra special thanks to our friends at Disney and Lucasfilm for helping us put this conversation together. Be sure to check out Andor Season 2, streaming right now in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos on Disney+. We will have links, as always, in our show notes. And if you'd like even more conversations with artists and filmmakers about how they use technology to tell their stories, be sure you are subscribed to us here at Dolby Creator Talks. If you're curious to know more about what we do at Dolby Creator Lab, head on over to dolbycreatorlab.com. There you'll find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of the show, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, this is Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Marroquin. Thanks for joining us.